I was just so tired of putting my energy in trying to control someone else that there was just a sense of, well, what can I do?
Elizabeth Aldana, the Breakup Artist, helps high achievers reclaim vitality and authenticity by breaking free from limiting beliefs and insecurities, fostering personal growth and self-discovery.
So many people tend to think of relationships only dealing with romantic partners. In reality, relationships are everywhere.
And the sad part is that unfortunately, so many people stay stuck in really toxic relationships because they're just afraid of what might be ahead of that. What is the most common issue that most people seek your help on breaking up with?
What I wasn't expecting but has come up a lot is,
Generally speaking, what are some good signs that indicate that it's time for a breakup now?
I would say,
I am with Elizabeth Aldana, who happens to be a breakup artist, as cool as that. And she helps motivated individuals to release patterns and places and people that no longer serve. Welcome, Elizabeth. Great to have you. And yeah, so glad to have this conversation because it's just so relevant, especially where we are the time of the year. And it's interesting because just last week I spoke to Emily Balcheris, who is a social psychologist, and she specializes in, goals and motivation. And we talked about how to set better habits and goals for next year. And here I am with you talking about how to break unhealthy patterns and release from, people, places, and stuff that, as I said, doesn't serve us anymore. So, yeah, like what is the backstory to all that you do in the context of what you do now? Like, what's the backstory of that?
yeah, well, first, thank you for having me here. And the backstory has come from, in order to be able to do more, sometimes we need to do less, right? In order to make room for the goals and the things that we're motivated about, we sometimes need to create space to do that. And so, what really got me to where I am today is the sense of, I think I was just tired with what I had before. It not necessarily being something that really aligned with me and what I wanted to do with my life. And so I decided that, okay, despite what everyone else is saying as this is the path you should take, this is where you'll end up, I started to just get curious about, well, what would I do if I could really take control of my life, if I could really make decisions for myself? And so that started to lead me towards this new life that I'm in. And really, when I looked back at it, it was a sense of, wow, I really broke up with a previous version of myself.
Yeah, amazing. Because I was going to ask you, like, did you break up with something that ignited this passion to help you do the same for others?
Yeah, it really was a sense of just breaking up with the version I was before. And I would say it really all came together for me, or at least it felt like a new chapter in my life in about 2016. I ended up moving to Singapore for work, and it was just the perfect, I think, recipe for allowing me to take a lot of the learnings I had had previously. I was always interested in self investment. Some people call it self help. I would call it self investment.
I like
And
that. I like that too.
yeah,
So
just
much.
really,
Yeah.
yeah. And there was just the sense of, I would, read these books and listen to, these audio, I guess CDs at that time. And I just felt like, okay, I was taking that information in, but I was still living the same life I would have every single day. And it wasn't until I moved to Singapore that it really gave me the opportunity to try things different, because I had to create a new routine being in a new environment. And that was sort of the catalyst for being able to see, well, one, this, belief that, people can't change, really seeing firsthand, no, people can change. I'm starting to change. And yeah, that was just, I mean, it's been so many years since then, and it's been an exponential snowball effect. But yeah, that was the beginning of seeing, okay, I'm not the person that I once was, um, and I can say goodbye to that person.
That's really cool. And indeed, it is never too late to change. But
Mhm.
if I understand you correctly, we're trying to break free from the monotony of your life and routine at the time.
I was trying to break free from the things that didn't make me feel good. So, I mean, I guess we'll get really personal. I was dating someone at the time when I moved to Singapore, and he didn't move with me because it was at first going to be a temporary situation. And before that, I used to be, a really jealous, insecure, impulsive person. On the outside, didn't show. Like I was still, people would see me and they would think I was the same person, but internally, I was hiding so many emotions. Like I was dying inside because I was constantly causing myself so much stress. Like my partner would go out and he would have dinner with a friend and come back, and I'd be like, did you talk to anyone? Did you look at anyone? You know, like my blood would boil, like my emotions would take over me. And it wasn't until I moved to Singapore that, that separation occurred, which that breakup of the relationship as it was started to show me things I hadn't really seen. So for example, instead of talking to him, it's like night and day. I would just want to know how his day was. I didn't care if he talked to someone. I just wanted to know he was doing okay. I wanted to know he was enjoying his day. And so that new experience allowed me to break up with the experience that was and started to show me a different way of being. And that mixed in with just really being able to apply a lot of the other self-investment, material that I had read before, being able to see that, hey, I'm halfway around the world and I'm doing okay. I'm surviving. It's not the end of my life as I thought it would be. Um, was just really, really interesting. It gave me new perspective, I guess.
And did this insecurity show up particularly in this relationship, or
I'm sorry, what was that?
did this insecurity show up in this particular relationship, or you've always
Oh,
kind of been
oh,
wired?
it was always there. That's the thing. I look back and I'm like, man, I sometimes feel really, really bad for, and really grateful for the partners I had early in my life because they were such good people. I just wasn't in a place where I knew my self worth. I felt like I was undeserving, unworthy, unlovable, rejection fears, abandonment fears, all of that stuff.
That is such an important point you make, because very often we, disguise insecurity or like being overprotective as, just trying to be overbearing. But like the fact is that it does come from deep rooted insecurity, and people miss that, right? Like,
Yeah.
how did you like release and break up with insecurity?
I think it was one, just that sense of space, that getting new perspective allowed me to see, oh, there is a different way of showing up. And wow, I'm not feeling the burden that I was feeling before. I'm not feeling the constant stress, the constant heaviness. And then that made me think like, well, what about that? And then, what have I read? And so there was always like this sense of like noticing, awareness, and curiosity, and being, I'd say, courageous enough to, okay, well, let me pull on that thread a little bit more and see where that leads me. And I think by pulling on that thread and not being afraid to step into what's unfamiliar, right? Because it's always scary. It's like I know, even though this is uncomfortable, I know what to expect from this. And so I can handle it, right? I've been handling, these insecurities, this jealousy, this impulsiveness for so long. I know what my life looks like. And even though it may not feel great, I know I can survive. Whereas on this other side, it's like, the idea is so tempting to not have to feel those like insecurities and impulsiveness and jealousy and heaviness and all that stuff. But I have no idea what life would look like. And so a lot of people find themselves in this like, we choose the devil we know over the devil we don't type of situation. And I think for me, what really allowed me to what feels like a 180 with my life and do the work that I'm doing right now is that sense of leaning into, I don't know, but I trust. I don't know, but I know this way of being right now, of that heaviness and stress and drain on my vitality, is not the way that I want to live. And so I'm going to go get curious. I'm going to go explore. I'm going to be courageous. I'm going to be creative. I'm going to be able to, believe in myself that I can create, design, whatever, a new way of showing up that feels more aligned with how I want to show up and, how I want to spend my day, who I want to be.
And because these things, like I said, are deeply rooted and they're just habitual, once you made that commitment to yourself, how did you then deal with every time these uncomfortable feelings showed up, like insecurity or jealousy or whatever else? Like, how did you in the moment deal with that?
Yeah, I would say it's really hard to understand that moment where I started to separate. I remember when I came back. So I moved to Singapore in 2016, came back around 2019. And I remember there was a point where I was walking in San Francisco and I felt like an emotion. I don't remember what the exact emotion was, but there was a sense of, I feel this way. And then, huh, wow, I'm separate from that emotion. And
Mm.
when did that happen? So I don't know when that specifically happened, but I would
Were
say
you
to get
taking
to,
therapy at the time out of curiosity?
I've only taken therapy like 3 or 4 sessions, and it was through work. Like, they offer something like Ginger where you go in and talk to someone. And that wasn't until probably 2021. I would say a lot of it just came from the books, reading the books. I think there was
That's so
always like,
beautiful.
yeah, like an internal knowing that something
It's
isn't right.
missing you. Something
Yeah,
is off. Like
yeah,
this guy seems great, he's doing fine, but I'm just always insecure for some reason. I'm just possessive
yeah,
about it. Like, what's going on? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think that was
Awareness is so key. Like that's literally life changing because people can just go through life and have zero awareness of why they do what they do. But having that awareness just is a beginning of change, I'd always say.
yeah. As you say that, it's almost a sense of looking at things and not blaming. I think I felt like it, when I would let my emotions get the best of me, there was a sense of putting the responsibility on other people. This person made me feel this way. This person did that, therefore I feel this way. And at some point, there was a sense of, well, I can't control the other person. Like that's too much. And maybe that's what it was. Maybe I was just so tired of putting my energy in trying to control someone else that there was just a sense of, well, what can I do? Right. There's like the serenity prayer of, grant me, help me understand what is within my control, what isn't, and, the courage to know the difference. And I know I totally messed up that prayer, but that's,
It's
the
all
just,
good. We get the
yeah.
gist of it, what you're trying to say.
Yeah. And so there was just a sense of like, well, what can I do? What is within my control? And being able to put that into practice. And I think everything is just small steps in being able to come back and almost like test, right? Like, okay, well, how did that go? How did that feel? And I would say it doesn't always show up immediately, but when I would like look back, I would see how drastically my life had changed from
Yeah.
just the small moments, from something coming up and in that moment being able to choose, do I want to go this way or do I want to go that way? And I found that the times I would choose to, I always like to have this, are we doing something out of love or are we doing something out of fear? As something approaches us, am I doing this because I don't want something to happen, so therefore that's the reason I'm doing, or am I doing something because, wow, I'm really grateful for this, or I'm really curious to see where this will go. There's a different energy that's applied to each of those. And so when I look back, I see the times that I leaned into love for myself, love for other people. That's really where I started to see the biggest change and the biggest release of just this heaviness that I would carry around.
And now you're bringing this awareness to other people's lives by helping them shift their patterns and break free from what's destructive in their lives. That's so cool.
Yeah, there's really this idea of relationships. I feel like my entire practice is around relationships.
Yeah.
And when we
I would
think of
imagine.
relationships, I'm sorry, what was that?
I would imagine so.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can't have the breakup without having the relationship first, right? And relationships, so many people tend to think of relationships only dealing with romantic partners. In
Mhm.
reality, relationships are everywhere.
Yep.
Relationships are mutual connections. They're, basically involving the energy and influence and exchange. And, these both sides, whether so it's people, places, patterns, habits, objects, anything like that. When two things come together, there's basically these two things shaping each other. They're impacting each other. They're evolving based on the interaction. And so when I work with people, I help them understand, well, what relationships do they have in their life?
Mm.
And out of those relationships, what relationships energize them and which relationships drain them. And for the ones that drain them, it's like, okay, well, let's talk about that. How can we start to break up with it? And then the other thing about breakups is it doesn't mean we have to go full 100 separation of it. It's really a sense of just change. A breakup is, equates to change. How do we change the relationship as it is? How do we break up as it is in order to create a more loving, energizing interaction?
Yeah, and the sad part is that unfortunately, so many people stay stuck in really toxic relationships because, they're just afraid of what might be ahead of that. And I had this saying, which I truly believe in, is that like the fear of change is greater than the fear of stagnation.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just feel stuck. So, like, I wanted to ask you, what is the most common issue that most people seek your help on breaking up with?
Yeah, it's been interesting. What I wasn't expecting but has come up a lot is guilt. Is guilt
Wow.
and fear of making a mistake that happened in the past again in the future. I find a lot of people, and sort of tied to that, it's a lot of people have no, or let's say little understanding of who they are, what their identity is, because I like to work with this concept, the success paradox. People who have achieved success. They went to the right school, they went to, they got the right job, have the right partner, the house, everything seems beautiful, right? They did everything right to get the thing that they were told would make them successful and would make them happy.
Yeah,
And
condition.
yeah, and they're not happy. They feel confused. They feel maybe a little depressed because they're like, I have no idea. And what comes from that is the sense of, we've heard imposter syndrome, right? When we try to stretch ourselves into a role that doesn't necessarily feel right. Well, there's this other term that I worked with someone to kind of come up with this. My copywriter, she's amazing. She was like imposter identities. And I was like, yeah, that's it. And it's the opposite of imposter syndrome where we're trying to stretch into it. Imposter identities is really about being so convinced that that is who you are that it's misaligned with who you actually are, right? That imposter identity was conditioned by external circumstances. Our parents telling us this is what we should do, our teachers telling us this is what we should do, society being like, this is what's right? And so when I work with people, it's a sense of them almost feeling like afraid to make another mistake
Yeah.
and guilt of holding on to what they had and also not knowing who they are. So a lot of the work I do is helping them shift through all of that and really come to a place that they trust themselves to make decisions, and just creating a lighter life for them.
And are these people usually like, are they receptive to change, or they just think they want to change, or they're just fed up of the way their lives are turning out for them with the guilt and whatever else is holding them back?
Yeah, it's they are open to change. They want something to change. They don't know what it is. And they think it's one thing. And as we talk, it's actually another thing. And then that's when it's like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready to change. They're ready to change when they think they know the answer, right? They're like, this is what I need to change in my life. But as soon as we recognize, oh no, it's this other thing that's really causing the pain, that's where there's the resistance of change because they
Yeah,
weren't ready.
what's with the reluctance towards change? Like, where do you think that comes from your own observations and research?
Yeah. Well, especially with the success paradox, right? They've been told that they have the right life. They've reached success. And so it's like from an external standard, it's like, wow, you've made it. But internally, they don't feel that. And so when they're thinking about changing, it's this conflict, this battle of, okay, well, do I feel better internally at the big costs, risk, expense of losing this external success exterior, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that's where it's like there's the saying, it's like the thing that got you here won't get you there type of
Yeah.
situation. And so all they know is the thing that got them to what seems like success. They're afraid to lose everything. People are just afraid to lose stuff.
That applies to change generally, right? Like whether it's a success or anything else. Change is scary because there's some fear that's holding you back.
Yeah, there's a this concept of like ego death, right? So, or
Yeah.
when we think of change, we almost have this fear of like, I don't know what's on the other side of that. Therefore, I feel like I'm going to die. And so there's this concept that I learned. I think probably through Mind Valley and Regan Hillier, right? I feel it's like there's your goal, right? It's like everyone's striving for this initial goal, and sometimes it's hard to get to that goal because our mind is like, oh, I don't, that's different than where we are now. And I don't know what's going to happen once I get to that goal. Like, what's on the other side of it?
Mhm.
And so there's almost this internal self sabotage of our minds like, it's safer over here. Just stay where you're at.
Right.
And what Regan introduced me to, and which has been super, super helpful, is this idea of, well, what's the goal beyond the goal? And so that way it starts to show your mind that, look, it's safe to reach that goal. It's even better. Your life, you're going to feel so much greater when you reach that goal. And it
Right.
is safe because you can see what's on the other side of that. And so I think that's something I also like to incorporate when I work with people. It's one, a lot around clarity. Where are you? Where do you want to be? But also how to create a sense of safety throughout
Mhm.
it all and a safe sense of trust in oneself. and I use that exercise to support that.
I guess that partly answers my next question, which is going to be how do you help people embrace unfamiliarity? Because that is the one that's so scary for us. We love the familiar zone, we love what we're comfortable with. So you help people embrace the unfamiliar zone by embracing trust, you said?
Yeah, trust is a huge aspect of it. The other thing is understanding, one's story, right? When we think it's scary on the other side, that itself is a story, right? Like, I don't know what's out there. Well, how do we start to take that fear, I don't know what's out there, that has a very, negative tone to it, and change that to like, I can't wait to see what's out there, right? Like those two different, that reframe, those two different statements have very different energies. And so, yeah, building trust, helping people to see what they tell themselves and how they keep themselves in a certain, playground.
And like generally speaking, what are some good signs that indicate that it's time for a breakup now?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say just to start to feeling like a sense of internal antsiness, so a sense of like questioning, like, oh, what did I do? Where did I go wrong? Or why isn't this happening? Like once you start questioning that stuff, and that
Stagnation, frustration, all those things.
burnout. I'd also say too a sense of when you're starting to get constantly sick as well, right? It's your body providing feedback something isn't right. So I would just say when things start to feel not okay, when stress starts to feel heavy, I think that's the moment where it's like there's this beautiful saying, you're not headed for a breakdown, you're headed for a breakup, right? So it's like that moment where you're starting to feel like, am I going to break down? Is my life going to break down? Is something not right? That's the moment to start exploring a breakup.
And in your own story, I think, what would you say is the most revelational thing that you've discovered through this journey of, unlearning and relearning about just detaching from things that weren't the best thing for you in your life?
I would say the thing I've learned has been a sense of what am I doing because other people told me this is right versus what am I doing because I'm actually interested in it. And the reason I say this is because I I started to explore coaching maybe about 3 years ago, and that was when a sense of like there was an immediate hit of this is what I want to do with my life. Went in for certification, stuff like that. But I guess a little backstory on that. I, was working at a company. I got a Slack message that was like, "Hey, we're changing priorities. Let's get a new schedule together and some new resources." Nothing crazy, nothing out of the ordinary. But I think the fact that it was so just mundane made me just look at that message and think, I can't do this for another 30 years. Like I it just that feeling. And so I went for a walk and just like, universe, please give me clarity and follow through. What is it that I am meant to do, that I want to do, that's going to light me up? And the idea of coaching came to mind. And the funny thing is, coaching came to me two other times in my life. One when I was in college, I was standing in front of the kinesiology building, and I was like, man, I would really love to be a fitness instructor. It's like I loved going to the gym
Wow.
every day, like I loved working out. And there was a voice that showed up. It's like, no, you're not going to make any money that way. No, go into business, go into PR, communications. And so I ignored myself, right? I ignored what it was that came to mind, what lit me up to go down this is the right path. Then again, maybe when I was in Singapore, probably 2017, 2018, I was in Bali, just vacationing by myself, reading some life coaching book. And again, the idea was like, what if I could become a life coach? And that voice showed up. You're too young. You don't have your life together, whatever the excuses. And so I was like, okay, back to my life as it is. And so this time when that idea of coaching came, just popped into my head, it was quiet. There was no excuses. There was nothing telling me
Oh.
no. And so that afternoon, I started to look up programs. I wanted to make sure I was going through the right, certification and all of that stuff, doing things the right way. But I think that's the thing. It's a when I started to pay attention to what it is that I wanted, despite it not making sense, despite it not aligning what other people would think is right, that's when I started to see my life change. That's when I started to feel good, and feel lighter. So that's the thing I learned. If that, I might have gone off a little bit, but
Right on track. So pursuing your truth, basically.
yeah,
The essence of what you're saying is following your inner voice, your gut, as you kept hearing, and yeah, just pursuing your truth against everyone else's expectations and judgments, I guess.
yeah,
So I guess the next obvious question, given where we are, is that time of the year where we're ending this year, entering a new one. What is an effective strategy for embracing the breakup process and staying on track?
yeah. Yeah, I think it's really great. I'm always a fan of writing things down. I think when we just hold things in our head, it
It
tends to
doesn't
just,
work at
yeah,
all.
it gets jumbled up, and it's almost like, here, you
Overwhelming.
carry this, continue to carry this. And so what I would say is, look back at 2024 or just the previous life. Like, what are things that, you feel really great about, things you don't feel great about? And for the things that we don't feel great about, start to just understand, well, what about that didn't I like? And what would I like in its place? And having that list of what I would like in its place and having that, easily available to you at any point, I think that's the thing that we go into with 2025 and being able to reference back often. Because if we don't have that, almost like that rock, that North Star, it's very easy to get, pulled into the usual routines, the usual mindsets, narratives. So being able to have something that reminds you this is what I'm aiming towards, I find that to be very, very helpful, and it seemed to work with some clients I've had.
Yeah, that makes sense. Having some sort of visual cue that reminds you of, what you started the year with in terms of your goal and what you don't want to repeat this year. But even in terms of just the actual process of change, of course, you fall back and forth so much because such is the journey of change. How do you then, if you do fall back, what is an ideal way to, just remind yourself and stay on track and again just embrace the discomfort and not give up. That's a
Yeah,
key, I think.
yeah. It's compassion is always, helpful, right?
Self
It's
compassion.
self compassion and compassion
Right.
for others, but in this case, self compassion. It's understanding that, okay, it's not always going to, work out on the first try, and that's okay. That's our journey, right? It's meant, it shows us, wow, this was more deeply rooted than we expected. Great. What do we do with that information? Again, do we want to move forward? Are we trying to get to this other place?
Mm.
Then step up again. I think there's this other saying that's really, really powerful. We get more of what we tolerate. And so it's in that moment when we mess up, it's like, okay, we didn't necessarily stick to what we said we were going to stick to, or we fell back in some way. But this is a moment again. Am I going to tolerate this? Is this going to be what I get for the rest of my life? And that I've found has been a pretty powerful motivator to decide to step out of it.
Many people conflate or confuse compassion with complacency. What would you
Hmm.
have to say about that?
I would say, yeah, complacency tends to me feel like lack of action. Would you say that resonates with you too?
Sure, but people think that if I'm self-compassionate, then I just like slack off and, oh yeah, it's fine, you're great the way you are, it's okay, cut yourself some slack, just
Yeah,
be. So how in your books do you differentiate between the two?
yeah. I would say self compassion is the sense of like taking action. It's not necessarily throwing up. It's almost, so I would say there's almost like a few different layers to it. It's a not throwing it to other people, not throwing it to the universe or to whatever, like, whatever is going to happen. And I'm just going to sit back. It takes action. It takes agency, I would say. So it's a not being hard on yourself, but recognizing there is an effort on your part that needs to be done. And, again, I keep saying this a lot, but the universe is going to meet you where you're at. And so if you're just sitting back doing nothing and being like, I'm just going to wishful thinking, and it's like, okay, well,
Visualization.
yeah, where's the energy shifting there? Energy shifts when there starts to be movement, when,
Momentum. Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So I would say that's the difference.
Do you have like a blueprint for this whole process of breakups? And if you do, then like what would you summarize it as?
Yeah, I would say there's a framework that I have in the sense of just like different types of breakups, and it's very bespoke to the people that I work with. But in
Mm.
general, there's like there's always just like a bag of things you can pull from. So breaking up with lack of clarity, breaking up with control, breaking up with tolerance. Again, tolerating the things we don't want in our life. Um, so I would say that's almost sort of like a framework, but it really becomes so unique and personalized to the person that I'm working with because, well, one, it seems like it may be that's the breakup we need to work on until we have a conversation and we see, oh, it's 5 layers deep type of situation. And some people like really like a lot of space and compassion, while other people really like just tough love, like let's
Yeah.
get to it. So it really depends on the person on the other end.
So it depends on what you're breaking up with, whether it's tolerance or bad patterns, or like in the context of relationships. Do you also help people have difficult conversations in terms
Yeah.
of how to do that?
Yeah, so if for I guess in that example, if someone's having a difficult conversation, like I've worked with a woman who feels like it's not romantic relationship, but it's work relationship, and
Hmm.
feeling like her boundaries are constantly crossed, and feeling uncomfortable to speak her truth or what her expectations are for not wanting to really upset the other person because she's very caring. She wants to make sure
Yeah,
everyone is like, oh,
empathetic.
yeah.
Backfire sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in that case, it's been a matter of like, well, what about the relationship isn't feeling right? Where do you feel like your boundaries are being crossed? And what do you feel like the other person needs to hear? And so there's a lot of, I would say, questions that come to mind, but there's also this element of just stillness and going very deep in yourself. And
Mm.
so I like to, during my sessions, I like to actually have a lot of space where we don't rush into the next question, but let it almost marinate there because people, I would say people don't give a lot of space for themselves to think about these things, right? Even as we go on our day and there's a situation that happens, we'll ask ourselves questions like, why did that happen? Who
We're
does that
very
person think for?
reactive. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
very reactive.
but we also don't even give ourselves space to answer that question. We'll ask it, who does that person think they are? And then we'll jump on to the next question. It's like, so in the coaching session, not only do we ask those questions, but we also create the space for the question to be answered, as well as the reflection of that answer. Because when someone makes a statement, there's often this time it's like, oh, I didn't think I thought that, or wow, well maybe they did that because of this and therefore that. Like it's a very it's a very interesting thing that happens when we actually just stop.
Mm. Very interesting stuff. And hopefully, this conversation gives our people some insight into whatever's holding them back and how they can go about approaching this breakup process. So, thank you for your insights, Elizabeth. And where would you like people to find you?
Yeah, people can find me at breakupartist.coach.
Perfect. And actually, before that, I'm supposed to ask you, what does an epic being mean to you?
Yeah, I would say epic being means to be oneself, full self, complete self without limitations, to truly create whatever life they want and in the lightest, richest, easiest way.
Bang on. I'm into that.
Well, thank you so much.